we'll have a conversation for about 30 minutes with some of the questions that did emerge from today's research. And then we will have a chance to also get additional questions. And there is a team that is making those available, and I'll be able to read them from here. But I think to get us started, I would like to get into the phase of introductions. And maybe I'll start from the left side, Alex, and then I will come towards Sandra. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you, Ronald. My name is Alex Ochan. I'm from Bank of Uganda, the National Payment Systems Department, as Head of Financial Inclusion Division. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Buku. I'm Head Social Projects, Equity Bank, Uganda. We are doing a cash delivery in using an agency network in the refugee settlements. Thank you.
Good morning again, everyone. Thank you very much for hosting this event. My name is Stefan Deutscher. I am the head of crisis response with the World Food Program here in Uganda. So basically overseeing food and nutrition assistance to refugees and other vulnerable populations. And a big component of that is cash-based food assistance. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Anna Maria, and I represent the Uganda Cash Consortium. I believe it's still the biggest consortium led by NGOs. I started the role more than 1 year ago, and I'm very happy to be here because I've seen a lot of positive changes in terms of the common cash delivery approach. So I'm happy to be here and talk about this. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Namazi from MTN Uganda, currently overseeing the strategic partnerships. Thank you.
Actually, as we were having the break, some of the questions started to come in, and one of those that I picked out was from Sudan, where a colleague from the Central Bank of Sudan was asking about what are we doing in Uganda as the central bank in terms of advancing financial inclusion. And I think when we step back from cash and voucher assistance, that might be a good place to start, Alex, to see if we look at the ingredients we talked about, capabilities, access to financial services, it may be a good place to start and maybe ask you, Alex, what the central bank is doing about financial inclusion and what the perception is in terms of the definition of financial inclusion. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. I'm glad that there's a question not coming from the audience here, but actually from outside the country asking for the role of Bank of Uganda. I could talk about it and take a lot of time, but let me go back 10 years ago, or 10 to 12 years ago, around 2011, where there was a global push, globally looking at how different countries could push inclusive finance. And that's where the Bank of Uganda started from in terms of a project for financial inclusion. But 6 or 7 years, the Bank of Uganda, with the Minister of Finance, formulated the first strategy, which is the National Strategy for Financial Inclusion, 2017 to 2022, purely to bring together all the actors in the financial sector in pushing financial inclusion agenda forward. And that strategy looked at about 6 pillars, 5 pillars to be specific. One of the pillars is on reducing access barriers to financial services. And in access barriers, we are talking about is it convenient to customers to access a financial services point? In there came the agent banking regulations in 2007 and later the implementation of agent banking. But also issues around KYC came on board. Can we easily verify the national identification for the different players? I'm glad to say that for now, the MNOs are able to do that. But beyond the MNOs, the banks are also able to verify, especially the national ID, through the NIRA database without necessarily having to ask for more information. Then the second pillar is about credit infrastructure. How do we build our infrastructure around credit? And a case in point is enhancing the efficiency of our credit reference bureau, but also looking at other credit alternative or collateral, like what the Uganda Registration Services Bureau have done in line with the security interest in movable collateral, where you can pledge your movable collateral as security when you're borrowing. Yeah, so that is credit infrastructure. But also we have the digital infrastructure as a third pillar, and there comes in the mobile financial services, the mobile money. With the passing of the National Payment Systems Act in 2020 and later the implementing regulations in 2021, the Bank of Uganda has licensed about 14 players now in the space. So we expect that that will drive competition and lower prices of mobile financial services. Then the last one is enhancing savings, credit, and insurance, where we're looking at how do we promote savings. And there came the establishment of Uganda Microfinance Regulatory Authority that oversees the operations of SACCOs, microfinance, non-deposit taking microfinance, but also the VSLAs that are very common in villages. And of course, the most important part which we are talking about here is consumer protection and empowerment, where the Bank of Uganda takes a lead in that aspect. We have a separate strategy for financial literacy, which I could go in if necessary. So that's where the Bank of Uganda comes in. We are the Secretariat for the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, and especially it sits in my docket as Head of Financial Inclusion. You talked about how do we define financial inclusion. I don't think there is any single definition, but it looks around three aspects, depending on the country and your level of development. It looks at accessing financial services, which is the first entry point, using it as a second part, then the quality component, because beyond access and usage, there has to be convenience. You shouldn't take a lot of time in the bank. You should be able to trade or do whatever you want at your convenience. But also financial inclusion goes beyond what Bank of Uganda does, because the products and services are different, from savings products to insurance to investment, but also retirement planning. And that would be a broader coverage of what financial inclusion is. So the Bank of Uganda does not do it alone. We do it with other players and other sectors for insurance, retirement planning, microfinance, UMRA. So there are different stakeholders and development partners. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alex. I think, so building on that, as you've described the key three components being access, usage, and making sure that the citizens who access these services access them safely. And building on the earlier conversation we had today where we looked at different financial services used as an instrument to transfer assistance to refugees. I'm curious on, for example, Stefan, on seeing that if we step from financial inclusion and look at access to financial services, CVA is essentially expanding that access and contributing to what Alex has described for the financial inclusion strategy. But maybe to get a sense of this is a voluntary choice that refugees are making. So what could be part of those drivers, considering cash as a component has potentially exceeded 50% of the assistance that World Food Programme is providing. So what is that shift in terms of moving from cash to in-kind? What are the drivers behind it? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ronald. So when we move from one transfer modality, in our case, the traditional one, the historical one being in-kind food, so the provision of cereals, pulses, oils, salt, to a different transfer modality such as cash-based food assistance, first of all, we need to still keep into consideration what is the objective of what we're trying to achieve here. In the refugee context in Uganda, we are looking to meet basic food needs. Unfortunately, we do not have all the resources we require to meet the food consumption needs of refugees. but that remains our main objective, whether that's in-kind food or whether that's a cash-based transfer. Now, however, we also recognize that cash-based transfers is a strategic choice, and it can bring a number of secondary, very important programmatic objectives, such as digital financial inclusion. Now, don't get me wrong, WFP is not going to start to become the lead agency on financial inclusion. That's why we partner with expert agencies such as the UNCDF and also the private sector, of course, who bring in that expertise. But we recognize that the opportunities brought through cash-based transfers for digital financial inclusions are tremendous. So, for example, now looking at the user preference study a little bit from earlier, when we introduced cash in 2019 in Nakivale, we were first facing a lot of resistance to this change. Change is scary. People were used to decades of in-kind food assistance. They were worried about, low financial literacy levels. Where are we going to buy or access our cash? They were worried about increased food prices and the misuse of that money for alcohol or other things, which all of that, these fears, we need to alleviate through extremely well done community consultation, listening, putting the people we serve at the center of our assistance, and then demonstrate through financial literacy trainings, so that's where the user side comes in, but also through working with the private sector partners to build, for example, a financial service ecosystem within the settlement. And this is also in the spirit of, and we had our colleague Solomon from the CRF Secretariat this morning, the importance of moving from the provision of relief assistance to the pillar 3 of the CRF, self-reliance and resilience programming for refugees. And that is exactly in that spirit. So when we no longer are able, or if we no longer need to provide monthly cash-based food assistance, and I mentioned earlier that's $4 million every month going into the local economy, we want to ideally leave behind an ecosystem that can be leveraged and used not only by the humanitarian community and development partners, but that leaves behind improved potential for livelihoods through access to formal financial services of refugees.
Thanks, Stefan. And I think what you touched on, the strategic value of CVA having a component beyond an assistance delivery, but being able to provide, other resilience building interests. But I'm also curious, maybe as I turn to Anna Maria, being that when I listen to what Stefan is showing, that there is a strategic benefit that comes from this expansion, and there are many win-wins for different stakeholders. But what I'm also curious to learn from, your work with Danish Refugee Council and the consortium in Broad with Lutheran World Federation and Uganda Red Cross is, it's one thing to want to expand these services. The reality could be different. So I'm curious from the ground, what opportunities do you see and challenges in this scale up? And are there any solutions you might have identified on the ground? Thanks.
Thank you. Before I answer the question, I would like to mention something what Stefan said, that a big portion of our program is monitoring. We talk to our beneficiaries. So we really see that they prefer cash. They are very happy with receiving cash because obviously they have choice and they wouldn't like to go back to support in kind. However, they like what they are familiar with, yeah? What you said in Nakivale, for example. More people will prefer agency banking because they know what it is. So it's quite important to balance expectations of our refugees and what they know, yeah, to bring financial literacy training, digital literacy training if we want to bring the change. So it will happen, but slowly. I observe a lot of positive changes from the time when I started my role in terms of the common cash task approach. where we, as the Uganda Cash Consortium, for example, we take advantage of the economy of scale of UNHCR and our colleagues from WFP. So first of all, we know the financial service providers available in settlements. I observe that if we, as the consortium alone, would like to introduce mobile money or agency banking without our colleagues from UN, it's more challenging because the network of agency banking might be it's not big enough. So then our refugees, our beneficiaries, they start complaining that actually where to cash out the money. So it's very important that we coordinate together, we work together, and we don't rush with changes because, yeah, I know some examples when beneficiaries were quite disappointed that they didn't want to go to digital payments because the experience wasn't the best. However, as I said, I see the cooperation with UN agencies, with other colleagues from NGOs, where we share the information when we are aware which financial service providers are available, what's the approximate cost. So it helps a lot to plan how to expand the digitalization. So there are a lot of positive examples in terms of collaboration. However, obviously there are some challenges. The easiest way for us now to start a new cash assistance in a new settlement is to go for direct cash. Yeah. However, if you want to be digital, there are some challenges. It takes time to talk to financial service providers. Sometimes they might promise a bigger number of agents, and then we discover that it's not efficient. Yeah. Yeah, I would say that the number of financial service providers available in settlements, it's a barrier, and yeah, time to introduce this to refugees. That the literacy level is quite low. Especially in our case, we targeted the most vulnerable. So whatever we see, all the statistics, I have to take into consideration that for our group, the numbers will be lower. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. And it even now raises the question around the diversity of financial services available. If we are targeting, for example, some of the most vulnerable and expecting the ability to manipulate some of the functions to access, and that's kind of like the gist of a question I had for our private sector colleagues who are providing these services on the ground, Nathan Buku and Sandra Namazi, which is more around what do you see as a shift and a potential to go beyond, for example, access of services? The research today talked about it being largely, especially as you go more to bank models, being largely a cash-out transaction. So how do you, maybe I could start with you, Nathan, how do you see this access usage component? And is there a way you can lump it with the question around how some of these services can be sustained? Because, I mean, there's a cost element on the bank side in the long term. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'll look at it from an aspect of fast access and then sustaining it. So in terms of access, it has to, of course, be very inclusive. You have to consider the various segments of people under the refugees. So we have the vulnerable, the more vulnerable, but we also have a big percentage that is literary, of course, has literacy and also has digital literacy. So what we are saying is, in terms of access, you have to include them in terms of simplicity. So if you're going maybe to use a solution that requires pins, then there are chances that people will forget those pins. So you may need to come up with a solution that is simple to use, but eliminates memorizing pin codes. In terms of building an agency network, you will also need to remember there is a criteria that you need to follow. Regulators require you to follow a certain criteria so that you manage some risks. At the same time, you also need to consider that you will need to offer these services as close as possible. So the criteria drives us to already existing businesses. So that makes it much more higher to achieve for refugee settings. The second one would be the capability of the market to handle the kind of liquidity that is required. So you must have come with risk mitigation measures to have that. The beauty is that with these engagements, we have already been able to bring on board all the stakeholders. So the Bank of Uganda has been with us and has identified the various bottlenecks about agency recruitment, and I know they are in the process of responding. So that we are counting it like done. In terms of sustainability, this service is offered at a fee, and the fee may be punitive if you think of the costs elements that are involved. So what you have to do is you have to drive it multi-pronged. One, you must have a social aspect and an economic aspect. So you must be driving it, yes, to achieve a bit of some economic stability, but also looking at how you can leverage on the social capital that you create. So as a bank, for example, we are driving the two. So whatever we can't get economically, then we can get it on the social side. In sustaining, then, the other thing is you create a platform that can be used by anyone, and then you are able to bring on board many players, meaning that you can build and get leverage from scaling. So I think that's how we are planning to sustain, to ensure that even nationals, if they were to use the platform, they can just plug and play, so it will be very easy to sustain over a long time.
Yeah.
And based on the protracted displacement of the people we are serving, it seems they are not going anywhere very soon, so we still have time to serve them.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is graduation. So you can have a graduated model where you are a recipient of aid. All you need is someone to demystify banking for you and make it a daily tool of trade. So if you understand now banking as a life, tool that you use to solve your daily problems, then you can use it for self-reliance. Then you can move from receiving aid to micro enterprises, and you grow a business. So our intention now is to ensure that the refugees we are serving can have a way of moving from where they are to the next level of micro and small enterprises. Mm-hmm. From there, then you can even now start reading to them, and then creating a graduation method that tomorrow they can be independent borrowers from a bank.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. And now from, say, from the bank side, one of the advantages that we tended to see today was, of course, the cost element is a bit, higher. And I'm curious on the mobile money side, with considering the huge operational costs of keeping cell tower and all that, how, for example, does an institution like MTN see a long term, for example, 5-6 months cash transfers? Down the road, there is no more cash transfers. And so there's always a question of, can these services continue to be provided? So from your side, how do you see, this continued access and usage of services beyond, say, the cash transfers?
Thank you very much, Ronald. So for starters, I'm happy to say we're in all the 13 camps, and that's good. And also the host communities, we have presence there. So how do we ensure that there is continued usage, even after the cash disbursements from our partners in the future stuff? So right now we're empowering the refugees. Even as I speak right now, we have rigs in the settlement camps that are training refugees on how to use digital services on mobile. In particular, we are pushing saving, yeah? And that's a culture that is still lacking in Uganda, but we have onboarded a team of direct sales teams that are on the ground in the camps that are training the refugees on how to use mobile money. We've also gone ahead to train the women and youth, especially in Bidibidi and Kriandongo and other camps, to become agents. That's agents and also MomoPay merchants, even when the cash that has been dispersed to their wallets is no longer coming in, can they sustain their businesses? And MTN has gone ahead to half the startup capital for the women and youth, and we're working closely with Grameen Foundation and the GSMA. And I'm also happy to say, with the support of our partners, World Food Program, UNHCR, we have gone ahead to give free SIM cards. I know for the persons of concern, even what you think is 2,000 is quite an amount. So MTN has given free SIM cards to UNHCR for the disbursements we did, especially in the corona pandemic. And also I'm happy to say for the maintenance of the sites, MTN has a vision of delivering a digital bold world, and that includes everywhere you go, you should be able to get network coverage. So for us, it's key to make sure that even if it's the camps or the rural areas, there is network. Someone can not only communicate on GSM, but also transact in the digital space. So for us, it's key. And as I conclude, we've gone ahead to also work with American Towers to make sure that there is presence, of network. The sites are up, maintained properly. So with that, I'm happy we are going to even expand the vision of bold new digital world. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sandra. Anna Maria, I wanted to add on that.
Yes, I wanted to add that the Uganda Cash Consortium was in contact with our colleagues from MTN and requested a massive registration to give SIM cards to refugees in Chaka settlement. And first of all, as we discussed, there were some challenges with knowing your customer. We didn't experience this too much, and the registration was quite smooth. And what was quite important, refugees, they were happy to pay for SIM cards as well. So they are interested in having SIM cards. And yeah, I think that it's a good first step for us as well to see that, some services might be expanded and it doesn't necessarily to be very difficult.
Okay, I'll come back, Sandra, as we build on that, because the question of cost has been something that has also come up online. I see that Ivan Awoli from Save the Children was asking also about if there are efforts on both sides, bank models and telecom models, to review and find maybe tailored products that can be more affordable. In this case, for refugees who are not necessarily, entry point is not cash transfer, but entry point is direct client and customer. So as that question around costs comes up, I feel that it would be also important to bundle it with the question of digitizing payments. And for this, I want to check in again with Alex from the central bank, because there is an e-payment strategy that the central bank has. And the question is what role the central bank is doing to ease or advance digital payments, considering the cost savings that could come from that.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald, again for that question. I think let's start from what is the role of a regulator. It's basically we handle policy making really, and that's where we come in. But then in the policies that we make, or the laws that we make, should be more enabling and should make the market thrive. I clearly indicated that we have the NPS Act was passed, and the implementing regulations came on board, and we are licensing players. As of this month, we had about 14, and some of them are handling the same services. Now, our expectation is that in that process, there will be competition, and I wanted to come to this. We have very good findings from this research, but how many financial services providers are here? Are we disseminating to the right people? Because the information should go to the wider financial services space, that they know the opportunities that exist in the refugee camps. But anyway, having said that, in our strategy, we're looking at improving the regulations where there are barriers. Someone talked about KYC as a barrier to accessing financial services for the refugees. I'm a bit surprised on the side of mobile money because I think we allow attestation letters or the refugee ID from OPM. And I'm happy that Sandra has mentioned that they're able to register the refugees. On the side of agent banking, we've also received a lot of proposals, like Nathan mentioned, on how we can improve the current regulation, or who can become an agent, for example. How much information do you need before someone gets an agent banking license? But we're also throwing it back to the players that, okay, if you're a financial services provider, say a bank, it's not the role of the central bank to approve all the agents. You handle your agents and only report to us. So that the process or the turnaround time is a bit faster. So those are some of the proposals. We are also looking at issues around consumer protection and digital financial services, financial literacy, sorry. And as I speak, the team is developing a DFL framework, and I think working together with UNCDF and other players will really support us in this aspect. And of course, stakeholder collaboration in all these aspects, yeah. One other thing maybe that I didn't mention, the central bank is looking at improving interoperability among the different products and services. For example, you should be able to seamlessly transfer money from your bank account to a mobile money wallet. Between bank accounts should be seamless, but also between the different players. I do not need to have, say, an Airtel wallet, MTN wallet, and another wallet, like 4 or 5 wallets. I should be able to cross seamlessly. And one of the efforts we are trying is to establish a national switch that would support that. But all this cannot be done alone. We need the support of the different stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And when I come back for the potential last round of questions, I'll be interested to find out, because the current National Financial Inclusion Strategy expires 2022, having run from 2017 to 2022. So maybe towards as we wrap up, it would be nice to know what's on the horizon. How can the community of practice like this contribute to that process? But I want to check in Stefan, because digitizing payments is also something dear to the work that WFP has been doing for a while. And I think from there, we'll also check in with Nathan and Sheila. Then I'll come back to Anna Maria. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ronald. No, it's an excellent question. I would like to take an operational approach to my answer now that we've had the regulatory view. We've had tremendous challenges in promoting digital merchant payments in our cash-based assistance for a number of reasons. One of them we've already mentioned is knowledge and trust, and simply knowing that you can use your mobile phone or your bank card to pay a merchant and get your food items. There's a number of opportunities and advantages that we do our best to communicate to refugees. For example, they can save withdrawal fees. So it's for free. Momo payments, I think with both financial MNOs, is for free. Equity Bank has waived merchant payments fees in the context of our progress. So, but even that has not yet enabled us to develop a culture where people trust they can use some piece of plastic to pay for goods and services. And that it's incredibly difficult. It's behavioral change. One also maybe more from the supply side, and Nathan, you can add to that. One of the challenges we have seen specifically in Nakivale, we have in the very beginning as we rolled out, and that's a lessons learned for us and hopefully for other humanitarian partners, is we've really focused on cash outs because we wanted to make sure we knew about that culture that people want to see physical cash banknotes to know that, okay, I can actually buy stuff with this. So we have really pushed our financial service providers to build a network of agents within the settlement. We have helped them to select these agents. I mean, it's very difficult for the private sector to enter refugee settlements, so we also play a role of facilitations with the Office of the Prime Minister in collaboration with our sister agency UNHCR, of course. But the point being is, now we ended up with a lot of different agents to cash out that could also be potentially merchants. And then afterwards we tried to say, well, why don't you actually sell your food items through digital cash? And they were like, why? Why should I do that? I get money, I get a commission when refugees cash out, and then they end up buying in my shop anyways. So from an operational point of view, that's a lesson learned, that we need to make sure we do not cannibalize the ability for digital merchant payments, because we so much focus on liquidity and cash out. So in the design of an operation, that's very important to take into consideration from the very beginning as we work with FSPs to build an agent and merchant network.
Thanks, Stefan. And I think this gives us an opportunity to also merge some of the questions coming in around the same conversation of deepening of the financial services that are provided and the quality of the services provided. So Nathan, there's also a question around, we also saw in the study today that the feedback mechanisms, especially with bank model, access to agents and being able to get complaints resolved, was something that did come up. And there's also a question that has that a letter from ULAN has asked around West Nile. We also saw the disparities in regions, West Nile versus Southwest. What could be done to strengthen the products and services provided there? And so there's feedback, there's the product and services, but then also Emma Mutenyo from Andre Foods raised the question of the process, being able to get different services, card replacement, things like that. So when we lump the questions, we tend to see that from the bank side, what do you see will be the shift to boost the loop of complaints resolution, feedback, but also deepening the services, because there's also a question around it's heavily driven by cash out. How do we get into savings, investment? Yeah, thanks. Sorry, it's quite lumped.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll handle from maybe from the regulator side. Once the regulator gives you the environment, then it's very easy for you now to innovate around that. Then you have to get partnerships from the implementers. So WFP, and we have another 8 partners we work with. Then you, of course, must have a product that answers to, or is tailored for the refugees. The beauty about Equity Bank is we have been in the space of the bottom of the pyramid quite a long time, and we approach our market through that. So all our accounts are so we did not have to design a new product for refugees, because it is actually our normal, ordinary account that we use. So the second level was to make it more inclusive, where we had to come up with a biometric card, multi-wallet also, so that if somebody wants to use the same card for as an e-voucher, they can use. So it's a card linked to a bank account, but you not necessarily need a PIN. Then from there is an agency network, but we also opened it up that a beneficiary can walk into a branch, can walk into an ATM, and now with the Equity being a member of the agency banking network, agency banking company, you can also walk to another bank's agent and still be able to withdraw. So at a product level, you have to ensure that all those factors are considered. Yeah. So liquidity management, then you have to ensure that your agents are liquid. And as Stefan said, the approach should have been maybe flow of goods, not flow of money. But we missed that, and is a lesson to learn. So we're still managing the liquidity, but we are seeing a very big improvement on the cash requirements by our agents, particularly in Nakivale, where we have been now for almost 3 years. In terms of support, and there is always a perception that if a bank opens a branch in a settlement, it solves all the issues. No. It won't solve all. It will be half, because if you go to, for example, all the settlements, they are 30, 40 kilometers wide. So you will set up an agent in one location, a branch. But their beneficiaries will still need to access 20 kilometers. So you still need a second mechanism, which is agency. So there is no need of having a branch and still having agency. So you will still double up as the same way. The effort will not actually reduce or halved. In terms of complaints and card replacements, we are still doing this at the level of the beneficiary. So we are on ground based on the need. So when there are distributions, the bank is available, and then we have open lines. So in the case of anything, we have had the advantage of a very good partner, WFP, for example, who also whips the other partners they have to be able to collect complaints and list them and share with us. So we are able to respond to 100 complaints at a go based on a partner who is on ground giving us that information. So partnerships really work for this. In settlements where that is not happening, then it becomes much more problem, because you will be responding to an issue at a time, which makes it more costly.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I've fully addressed the question.
I think I'll come back to you, because although those mechanisms you mentioned exist, I think the question is, what do we see we could push more?
Yes, I think what we are missing is the knowledge. The beneficiaries still have they are not sensitized properly. We still need to do more. I don't want to say whose role it is. It's our joint role as stakeholders to sensitize more on the capabilities they have with a bank account, and also give them financial literacy.
Yeah.
Our intention as a bank is to deepen the products by ensuring that they can access credit. We already are rolling out a FSLA loan, where as FSLA can borrow and lend to its members. It has not taken up, it has not really been taken up. We are just at the initial stages.
Sorry, another, I have to pause a bit there, because the question of financial literacy has also been one that has been raised, because there's a question I also want to pose on with Sandra, because the question is around, it's coming from, yes, the question is coming from a letter around what are the plans, both ongoing and future, for both banks and MNOs to boost digital and basic literacy, considering to a large extent your services are beyond financial services. They're almost digital services, offered on a digital offering. And specifically, Sandra, I know you've had a lot of initiatives in West Nile around building this capacity. So what are you working on around digital literacy, financial literacy? And if you could bundle it with a question that has been raised around KYC. We didn't get a name of the person who asked it, but the question is, different financial institutions seem to have different interpretations on the ID, refugee ID attestation, and so it keeps this loop of, this limbo almost of like not knowing what is the real ID required and why is there this variance. So if you can touch on, from MTN perspective, what type of KYC you use, and then we will just have enough time for one last round of questions, then I'll come to Anna after you. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Ronald. So for KYC, we take two forms of KYC from the persons of concern or refugee. We take the refugee ID and the letter of attestation from the OPM's office. I know the refugees usually get a letter that they get from OPM to allow them to settle or to come into the country. So that's very different. We don't accept that, and usually that letter has their mother, their children. So no, that's not the one we consider. So we consider two, attestation later from OPM's office and the refugee ID. So what are we doing as MTN to ensure financial literacy and also financial inclusion? So we're working with UNCDF. We've worked on a project for 2.5 years. It will be 2.5 years in June, where we are training farmers and also refugees in West Nile and Northern Uganda on how to use mobile. So we train you on how to use a SIM card. We also came up with a device lending strategy. So the refugees can get a phone on a lending proposal. So we get your ID, and then in 3 installments, we expect that you are able to pay for the phone without panicking or really, really thinking about the cost. And also we've gone ahead to subsidize the cost of the phone. So we have a smartphone of 69,000, and also for the ones that can afford, we are having one of 150. And just again on financial inclusion, we even currently right now for the general mass giving upgrading SIM cards for free. There are still people who are using 2G, and I think that's why there is network connectivity issues, especially in the rural areas. So as a company, we've given back to the community, to the society, to the nation, to be able to upgrade your SIM card for free to 4G. And I think that's also something the refugees can benefit from. And then also on ground, again, with UNCDF, Grameen, and GSMA, we are training the refugees to use their SIM beyond just voice and SMS and data. We are training them to pay for bills, to pay for school fees, to pay for water, and I think that in itself ensures that we have financial inclusion and everyone is getting digitized in the mobile space.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So you've kind of triggered the last round of questions, because that last part you touched on, they can use their mobile money to pay school fees, is a question I have also for Nathan around beyond, say, transfers, the component of loans, the component of other financial services, because the typical level of vulnerability, unless, Mr. Sonko gave us a challenge today to move the conversation towards development, humanitarian development nexus component. So I would want to know what you're doing on the bank side towards, providing more services like those for refugees. But before then, we'll start with Anna, whom I'm interested to know that, collaboration is a very easier said than done. And Eunice today was talking about common cash platform. And, talking about a scenario where you go to Palabek and you don't have to reopen bank accounts because another entity opened them and you leverage that. But on the ground, you've been doing collaborative efforts around cash transfers. What does it really look like in practice? Thanks.
I'm happy to be able to answer in a very positive way because I see the collaboration. First of all, big thanks to the Cash Working Group that, this is the platform when we start many discussions. Second, as I said, with WFP, UNHCR, we have a lot of discussions. I contact my colleagues and ask where they are with their plans, so at least sometimes it's better for us to wait or to start some initiatives by ourselves. The same with NGOs, we share experiences, so it really exists. It might be better, obviously. However, I believe that if we are talking about the common approach, it's happening. I believe we need 1 or 2 years to see really, great approach or even platform. As Eunice said, now let's not talk about platform. However, at least the experiences we share, and it's very important for me to know when I plan some budgets, how much it might cost, because if we don't use these particular providers, at least we will discuss with our colleagues about the experiences. So, and thanks to this, we can use the economy of scale.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I think, Eunice, we took your point today that common cash is not creating monopolies or anything, but increasing those efficiencies. And I think it's nice to see different actors. I recall sometime in Dadaab, there was a report where one refugee had like 4 plastic cards and they could not remember 4 PIN numbers and all that. So there is a case for effectiveness and efficiency delivery without necessarily getting into the complexities of procurement and things like that. And so for Stefan, I guess building on that, the question I have around, you touched on $4 million monthly of cash transfers, and we are, 1.5 million refugees crossing into the 50% excess in terms of people receiving cash transfers. I can imagine when we reach 80% cash transfers, we will be looking in excess of $6 million US, all factors constant. What support do you think agencies like World Food Program need from government, from private sector, to be able to realize this for refugees? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ronald. First of all, we would not be able to sit here together and discuss these extremely pertinent, progressive issues around digital financial inclusion for refugees if it wasn't for the government of Uganda and their open refugee policy, giving rights and privileges to people fleeing war and disaster, seeking refuge in Uganda, and being able to work, getting allocated a plot of land, being able to open a fully fledged bank account, open a fully fledged mobile money account. So the regulatory environment is extremely important for us to be able to provide assistance better in contribution of relief and self-reliance and resilience programming and livelihood programming. So that's on the regulatory side. Of course, needless to say, but still very important, we are currently looking at providing, in the Southwest region, for example, only 40% of what refugees require for their daily food needs. That's and that's a human. It's terrible. Sorry, I'm almost speechless because we will not be able to continue that type of assistance and reaping the benefits of cash-based assistance and digital financial inclusion if we don't continue to meet the basic needs of refugees on a regular basis. That's the entry point. So that's general food assistance, but that's also other basic humanitarian assistance that is provided by other stakeholders. Only with that we can then leverage and reap the benefits for digital financial inclusion as well.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I have to check again on that question, being that what would that implication be if we are only able to provide 40%, for example? Does that mean that there would be need, for example, for additional services from private sector providers to boost the unmet need, and already in that component, cash transfers, savings are in a way, if it was in kind, maybe the subsidy would have been lower, right? Because there are savings in providing cash transfers in a way. So with that 40% is where I'm also leaning to ask Nathan around the question of, for refugees who are not very vulnerable, but have an ability to access loans and other products, could that be an alternative? But I want to first check with you.
Thank you. No, absolutely. So that's in our vision. Well, first of all, in terms of cash delivery, I wanted to say that earlier, but let me take the opportunity because we have been talking about we're not looking to build monopolies. Absolutely. We're looking at a vision where refugees can decide how they receive their assistance from humanitarian and development actors. Like, I want to use my mobile money account. No, I actually prefer using my bank account. So that's the long-term vision, but I wanted to just bring it in here on the side. But to answer your question, yes, absolutely. So by bringing financial services closer to unserved population that is currently still largely untapped by the private sector, we hope to open doors for financial service providers to recognize this as a viable market, to be able to develop financial service products that are tailored to the needs of refugees, which might be very different to other low-income customers in Uganda. I mean, start with the language, for example, or the trauma they have gone through coming from their own countries. One specific hope that we've had, and it's a nut we haven't been able to crack yet, we've had countless conversations, is, for example, if we move to digital merchant payments, wouldn't we be able to build a track record, like a transaction history of that merchant, which might be a refugee, might have a little shop, not very well off, but just, building a livelihood by selling food. If WFP and our private sector providers are able to encourage the culture of digital merchant payments, that merchant, which can really be a small shop, can build a transaction history which may make them eligible for loans or credits. And that's a theory we're yet to put into practice, and something we're working on with various partners, including one specific area maybe to keep an eye on is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation learning grant we have received specifically in Isingiro to look into digital financial inclusion and women economic empowerment.
Thank you. And that, Stefan, leads us to the last question I have for Nathan and Alex Ochan, which is, so Nathan, if you could build more on that component, is there a potential for these other financial services that enhance that value proposition for the customer? And I would like Alex to wrap up the session by giving us a view of what comes next now that financial inclusion strategy expires this year. What do we have on the horizon? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ronald. For us, we are looking at first ensuring that we can have digital onboarding, such that on your phone you can be able to open accounts. It's already happening for nationals. So we will be knocking doors on the government to be able to have access to the refugee database for purposes of accounts opening. We also look at moving from a card-based transactions to cardless transactions. So it would be either on mobile or you can present your biometrics and you are able to transact. Then, of course, with transaction history, as Stefan has said, then we also need the demonstration of ability to pay for credit. So we are in that space, and we already have partnerships, particularly specifically with MasterCard, to drive uptake of credit by refugees. And we are already in a high gear to ensure that is done. And we also look at widening it much more to even facilitating trade, to ensure that even business people who are dealing with these refugees are facilitated to provide the services that are required, including refugees themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I keep saying if you don't know the problem, you can never solve it. And I'm happy that this kind of engagement enables us to know where the pain points are and where the problems are. And I'm happy for this research that it took into account both the demand side and the supply side by looking at the providers as well as the consumers of financial services, specifically for the refugees and maybe the host communities. What next for the bank and maybe government, because the strategy is not just a Bank of Uganda strategy. Indeed, the strategy ends around September this year. And also the strategy for financial literacy, we are on midway because it's 2019 to 2024. The Bank of Uganda did a financial capability survey, and the results are getting out soon, that assesses the level of financial literacy of Ugandans. And we also did one of financial literacy for the refugees. We specifically went to Kriandongo. We will be releasing the findings, perhaps for the benefit of the other users. I see very similar findings with the presentation that was made today. For financial literacy, we plan to refine the interventions in the action plan for financial literacy. As you're aware, we already have refugees as a special interest group in our strategy for financial literacy. For the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, these findings will be very useful for us. Our current priority areas are women, youth, and rural areas, but we think in the next strategy we'll put refugees as a priority area in this to bring more focus and enable us address some of the needs. Of course, going forward, I see more of digital financial services pushing the next strategy, and perhaps financial literacy and consumer protection. I stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandra, Namazi, Anna Maria. I'm going to try and pronounce Jinska. Jinska. Before I twist my tongue, Stefan Worshop, Nathan Buku, and Alex Ochan. I hope this has been quite informative. And one of the things that Alex didn't mention, which we pride the central bank for, is they visited Nakivale with the Cash Working Group and World Food Program and different stakeholders. And there's a whole action plan that the central bank is preparing to respond to various other issues that we didn't have a chance to discuss today. Thank you, and over to you, Marike.